All right, should we get started? Good, okay. Well, hello everyone. It's great to see such a good turnout. I'm Marty Maxwell Lane, Associate Professor of Graphic Design at the School of Art, and I'm on the advisory board for AIGA Northwest Arkansas. Thank you all for joining us for this timely panel discussion about empowering the women's vote. Before I hand it over to the moderator and panelists, I wanted to share some logistics about the exhibition that accompanies this panel. There are posters by 71 women from across the country, all addressing the women's vote, on display at TheatreSquared downtown for the month of October. You can view the majority of them from outside, so you can view them safely during times of COVID. There's a free exhibition catalog, which is really beautiful, and it's available at the box office at TheatreSquared or at Maxines Tap Room. And all the posters in the exhibition can be downloaded for free. And later, once we get going, we'll drop the link for that in the chat for everyone. There's a ton of people I need to thank for helping make this project happen, but for efficiency, I'll drop those all in the chat also. We would like to acknowledge the School of Art lecture series, which this panel is a part of, would not be possible without generous funding from the Walton Family Foundation. I want to introduce our moderator for the panel, Aricka Lewis. Aricka is an educator in the graphic design program. She's a musician, a designer. I always say she does all the things. She currently is a senior UX designer at Ad Hoc, where she designs veteran-centered online services. So I'll hand it over, Aricka.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here and so excited to see some familiar faces and some new faces. So looking forward to the conversation. I just wanted to introduce a bit about what we're going to be talking about today. And excuse me if I'm looking over, my notes are here because we're in a digital world right now. So I thank you for the accommodations. So we're here to celebrate or commemorate, I should say, the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And what that means for us today, and specifically how that has impacted women's rights and women's vote over the last 100 years. With the goal being, with this exhibition, as Marty said, to motivate people to vote in the best way that us visual designers know how. A couple of things I want to mention. This is an inclusive space, and we will encourage you to participate in the chat, but please make sure that your comments are conducive to that environment, and we're welcoming to everyone here. Also, it is being recorded. We do not have closed captioning for this live event, but we will have closed captioning once it's posted online on the School of Art, UARK School of Art YouTube page. So look out for that in the coming days after this. There will be a Q&A at the end. So throughout, if you have questions that you want to ask any of our panelists who will introduce themselves here in a second, throw them in the chat and I will read them off before we go today during the Q&A section of our panel. And with that, I'm going to leave a little bit of time for our panelists to introduce themselves. And I guess I'll call on Kelly first, since you're the curator, and then maybe y'all can just popcorn it to each other.
All right. So I am Kelly Salchow MacArthur. I'm a professor of graphic design at Michigan State University. And maybe I'll popcorn it to the other Kelly, Kelly Walters.
Hi, my name is Kelly Walters, and I am an artist, a designer, and I'm an assistant professor at Parsons School of Design, New York. And I'll pass it to Raven, I think. Oh, I think you're muted.
Hi, I'm Raven, and I'm a local, thank you, Kelly. Hi, I'm Raven Cook, and I am a local museum educator, but I also do a lot of work with Black history education in the local community. I have a radio show called Reflections in Black on KUAF 91.3 FM. It comes on Wednesdays at noon and 7. And I also do a lot of work with different organizations like the League of Women Voters and the NAACP. And I'll kick it to, let's see.
I think we've got Jenna.
Yeah, I'm looking for her on the squares. Jenna, I'll kick it to you.
Thank you, Raven. My name is Jenna, and I am a senior at the University of Arkansas. I'm studying political science, African American studies, and Southern studies, and I am involved on several state and local campaigns.
Wonderful. We're so excited to have you all here. This is a phenomenal panel of women, and I'm so excited to hear this conversation today. So I guess the first question, I'll direct it again to you, Kelly. Can you tell us a bit about how this exhibition came to be?
Yeah, I am more than happy to. And I should have mentioned also that I'm so excited to be here today and grateful that you have invited me to be a part of this. So back in 2018, I started coming upon articles that were noting that the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment being ratified to the US Constitution was coming up. And I thought, well, this could be such an amazing opportunity, the only opportunity in my lifetime, to help catalyze women in design, to commemorate the 100 years of voting rights for some women, admittedly, but to really start a dialogue and a collective energy around this election. And so I was dreaming about this, and I knew that AIGA National had done Get Out the Vote campaigns in the past presidential election cycles. And I felt like this could be potentially a huge project, and definitely one that I want to be able to tackle on my own. So I reached out to one of my design heroes, Nancy Skolos, who I was really lucky and inspired. I was lucky to study under her when I was a grad student at RISD, and so inspired by the work that she does and has done for many years. And she willingly got on board, and we've partnered through this over the past almost 2 years. It's been a lot of work. We imagine that this could be a poster initiative where we could invite a really exciting list of women to contribute posters. We came up with that list, and we received 65 posters from 71 women. Every woman who was invited was also asked if they would like to invite another woman to design a poster. And so it's really a great collection. As we were, in the, the early stages of this project, we reached out to AIGA National to join us. And then we connected with the League of Women Voters. So using their networks and their platforms, it's really increased the scale of this project. So now it's really exciting as the exhibition approaches that the posters, as Marty mentioned, are available for download and available to the public. Exhibitions are happening across the country. And I hope that these posters are being seen in storefronts and in yards, and anybody can do whatever they want with these posters, but I sure hope it helps invigorate voter participation. We designed a catalog. I would say one of the best things about the catalog is the timeline, but really the best thing is the whole collection of posters that we got from these great designers. But the timeline tells a very complex and rough story of women's suffrage that was fraught with inequity and discrimination. So this whole project has been such an eye-opening experience, and I think it's really exciting to have all of these designers come together in a celebration of women in design and acknowledging the 100 years that we've come through. And I'm really looking forward to how many people are going to vote in 2020 and where we go from here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Kelly Walters, I know that you are one of those 71 women who contributed to the design. Can you speak to maybe why you wanted to be part of this project?
Yes, I think for me, similar to Kelly, I also studied under Nancy. And so I think when both of them had reached out about this project, I was excited because, I learned so much, I think, from Nancy when I was in school. But I think at the same time, I was also really conflicted because I felt like there was still this aspect of it that for Black women and women of color, like we couldn't really celebrate 100 years. And so I struggled, I think, for the very beginning part of this project to think about how I could be reflective of that history as well, in tandem with, thinking about 100 years, but then also thinking about 55 years as like the true sort of time for me, and thinking about family members that would have been impacted by this as well. So I think I found it as an opportunity to kind of serve as dual purpose, to kind of acknowledge both histories intertwined. And I think in my poster that I contributed, I pulled a quote from an African-American female suffrage named Mary Church Terrell. And I was just really inspired by, the creation of, I think, let me just make sure I don't say incorrectly, the National Association of Colored Women. And so for me, it was really important that her words were reflected in my poster, and Lifting as We Climb to me is reflective of not only that period in time, but also right now as we're trying to kind of figure out how to ensure that everyone has equal rights. And so I think that that was part of the major sort of aspect of my participation and the way in which I wanted to design my poster. And the last two things I'll say is, like, in the design, it was bringing in sort of like aspects of the Pan-African flag. So it's black, red, and green, but then sort of like the yellow and gold that kind of reflects the women's suffrage movement. And so I think it was like, how do you tie both of these together and kind of reflect a dual history? And for me, that was part of the sort of goal in terms of my participation in the project.
Thank you. That's a really interesting perspective. And I would actually like to hear from Raven and Jenna about, maybe you can kick us off on our conversation about the history of the 19th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act, and kind of how that's all impacting our political climate today, and even our outlook and impact of how we view women's rights. So I don't know who wants to go first, but would like to hear from one of you. Or I can call on somebody. Raven? Or you can't unmute. Oh no. Well, Jenna, do you want to go, and then I'll see if we can get.
Sure. Thank you so much, by the way, just for having me be on this panel. I feel very thankful to join all of you here. Whenever I was thinking about preparing for this discussion and what I wanted to contribute, I kept going back to my mentor, Dr. Angie Maxwell, who researches and publishes a ton about race and gender and citizenship in the South. And so for me, as a white woman from the South, I'm particularly concerned about the role that Southern white women, or Southern white womanhood, played in securing the right to vote, and for whom particularly. And so sort of the history of the ratification of the 19th Amendment is wrapped up. Women can claim some responsibility for the decisive vote leading to the ratification of the 19th Amendment, because Tennessee was the 36th and final state needed to ratify it. And the activism of Mary Church Terrell, who Kelly mentioned before, and Ida B. Wells and other Black female activists from the South helped organize women's suffrage groups in the region. However, like many Southern states, Tennessee had a very strong anti-suffrage movement as well. And the anti-suffrage movement in the South was rooted in a tradition of white supremacy. Southern states were obsessed with securing congressional representation, and they still are. And they feared that expanding the voting population to include women would ultimately lead to the enfranchisement of all Black people as well, in which case white supremacists would lose electoral power. And then on the flip side, there was support of women's suffrage as a means or as a way to ensure white supremacy, and in turn solidify their political power in the region. And the suffrage groups like the National Women's Party and NASA did very little to denounce those forces, and they aligned themselves with the push for, or they didn't align themselves for the push for enfranchisement of all people. And after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the South passed laws that prohibited Black women from voting in primaries. And that's not to mention the myriad of ways that the South prohibited all Black people from voting, whether that was through intimidation, poll taxes, felony convictions, literacy tests, whatever. And so like my point in saying all of this is simply that the intersection between anti-suffrage and racism is precisely what the South as a region must reconcile moving forward. And it's extremely poignant today. And for white women especially, we have to interrogate this contract we signed with white supremacy in order for us to vote. These tensions are still affecting Southern women today. Dr. Maxwell writes about why Southern white women vote against feminism. And she offers insight on the role that Southern white women and mostly Southern white religious women played in handing the GOP the South after Carter's victories in the 70s. And so that's still like a force that this region is reckoning with still. Donald Trump won the support of Southern white women by 25 points. And so all of that is to say that the women's vote is not singular or monolithic. Southern white women have a history of being more concerned about securing their seat on this fancy Victorian pedestal than they are securing equal opportunities for all women, which is something the GOP has taken advantage of.
Yeah, and that was really beautifully said, like the way you observe the politics of that is incredible. For me personally, I got really engaged in considering particularly Black women in suffrage when I was in college. I had a professor who was a colleague of Dr. Angie Maxwell, Dr. Pearl Dow, who kind of shifted my consciousness to the role of Black women in politics. Upon entering college, I was incredibly, I would say, well-versed of just the general African-American history. But when it came to knowing more about my role as a Black woman, I was hungry and I was searching for more. So I got the book, and I'll be dropping like a couple book titles, but I got the book When and Where I Enter by Paula Giddings. And that book is really important because Paula Giddings really lays out a framework and really lays out a historiography of the Black women's role in everything. And she's really precise and really clear. And I thought that was really important to my development as a Black female, as someone working in the movement. It was really critical. Then Black Lives Matter started and it became another conversation, right? So Mary Church Terrell, thinking of her in her book, Black woman in a white world, thinking of her journey. The autobiography of Mary Church Terrell is really important, really diving into her sense of self, going through that movement. I carry those women with me when I do this work of registering voters, when I do this work of speaking to groups about the importance of voting, because it has been such a long road for African American women. And thinking of also the people that you may not have heard of. My grandmother used the church, right, as a political tool to be able to get people registered to vote. So really thinking about the largesse of Black culture and how it's all been used, from cooking to church to parties to all sororities, right? Thinking of all these ways that Black people have really used those spaces as areas to really reiterate the importance of our human right? This right to vote, to be a part of this culture that has constantly tried to exclude us, right? Like politically. It's such a beautiful story. I think Jenna laid it out very well, so I don't have to do too much, but I will reiterate, like, that book, When and Where I Enter, really does lay a really great framework. And a more contemporary resource is called The Vanguard by Martha S. Jones. It just came out, and I've been working through it for preparation for this, and it's beautifully written, beautifully tied to Paula Giddings. So if you all have a chance, please read those and get more into thinking about the vote from the perspective of Black women and what that road was like, because it was a tough one for sure.
Wow, two really beautiful answers. Thank you so much. Kelly's plural, do you have anything that you want to add to that conversation?
I so appreciate the insight that everyone has shared, and it's this kind of inquiry and critical look at the past 100 years that contributes to the richness and the depth and the importance of this project. Yeah, I'm very proud of the poster collection because there are so many different voices and different perspectives shared, and these designers share their passion and their individuality and their emotion through those posters.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo on what Jenna and Raven are mentioning. And I think in terms of my research as a designer, a lot of my work deals around the kind of depiction of Blackness and Black visual culture from a mainstream kind of lens. And so I'm often looking at the spaces of television and film, of the internet, memes, digital culture. And what's interesting about the conversation around politics and voting and political power is that it's all tied to all of those spaces as well. And I recently had created a presentation about the historical context around music sheet covers from the Jim Crow post-Reconstruction era. And before I got to the point of talking about all of the music sheet covers that were coming out of that period, there was this whole historical lineage that I was trying to unpack with the audience and also for myself. And it really just laid out the map of this country in terms of the tug of war that has stayed since, even though we've been emancipated, there's been a tug of war back and forth of repeal, replace, repeal, replace. Okay, let's move forward, let's move back. And it's always maintained itself in this way. And you see it operating across the political landscape. You see it operating across any sector, and even, like I said, mainstream culture. And it's, for me, really interesting to think about the ways in which activism has taken form across the decades, across hundreds of years, to move a whole body and a society forward, but at the same time still see an undercurrent that exists, and you can still find it and you can see it. And so what you're mentioning, Jenna and Raven, like I completely hear that and see that. And it's a challenge. So I just wanted to sort of add to that in that way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I know we touched a little bit about the different ways in which we have impacted political movements, be it through visual design or through our communities. I'm interested to hear how you all think that graphic design, visual design specifically, has impacted political movements throughout history.
Well, I'll put on my museum educator hat for a second. Well, for me, I observe a lot of works, especially like political works. And I really think this project is really important because during the time of the George Floyd protests, I intentionally told people like, save your posters. They're so important to thinking of like the history, right? Like thinking of how collectively these voices speak. There's an artist named Hank Willis Thomas that says all art is political, right? There's this driving notion that like everything that's happening on a canvas, on us in a digital space, is done with intention, is done with voice. And so I really think it's really critical for women to be a part of the conversation, right? That art is presenting, that the space of graphic design is presenting, that the conversation of all the elements of art, right, are doing. So I, as an educator, right, who works with students, I'm very aware, and I try to stay very conscious of messages and the voice of an object, right, of a piece, and try to be very sensitive to that insofar as thinking of the totality of this exhibition, and then how these pieces are speaking collectively, like what's the heart of them. So I think graphic design and politics work really beautifully together because they're both expressions of a voice, right? They're both trying to get you to hear something. And I think it's really beautiful when people can hear it in a way that's different and unique and empowers them to be creative and express themselves in new ways as well. So I'll say, I think this intersection of art and politics is really important, and it always has been, and it's always been something that the Black American community has looked to, thinking of the NAACP with the movement against lynchings, right? Thinking of all these women's rights to vote, right? All these different movements have been, even the Harlem Renaissance, that's a political space, right? Like people are trying to figure out these notions of identity and how to be seen in this world and what that means. So I think this is a really, really important show, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it. So thank you, Marty, for reaching out.
You know, I could interject that early on in this process, we were talking about maybe the form of these messages wouldn't be best captured in a poster. We thought, well, maybe a motion piece, or, you know, maybe we need to think more openly about what the format could be. But we also looked back to history and said, well, the poster has been out there sharing very strong messages with the populace for over 100 years. And it's such an accessible format for everyone that I really love that they can be hung on a light post out on the sidewalk or something. Like that's how people get these messages out. It's really a format of the people, and it seemed appropriate.
The other thing I would say in terms of graphic design is that for me, some of the most like critical examples that I've seen in regards to political movements are, and like just coming out of like, let's say the Black Panther Party and like the Black Panther newspaper, and a lot of the work that Emory Douglas had produced during that era. Like when I came across that, when I was studying as a student, I was just excited to see how newspapers also, in addition to posters, but newspapers were also a form of disseminating ideas and really making sure that things were circulating. And prior to the Black Panther newspaper, all of the other sort of types of newspapers that were happening and circling earlier in just trying to kind of fight and create and abolish slavery, right? I think that there were so many ways that the printed form has the capacity to fold itself and then pack itself away and get shipped somewhere. And I think as a tool to see design, the printed media as not only functional, but also powerful when it's unfolded and then stuck to a wall. So I think that, graphic design has a huge capacity to change ideas, inform, excite, aggravate. I mean, it has the capacity to really change the way one might be thinking about their view of the world. And it's just a sheet of paper. And so I think that's kind of a really powerful aspect, I think, of like the printed aspect of graphic design.
I would say also, I think everyone has already offered incredible insight on this question. But from my experience as like a organizer or community organizer interested in seeing like public policy or sustaining progressive movements, it feels to me, and I think history points to this as well, that sustaining progressive movements and progressive sensibilities is achieved best by the creative arts, and that the social and political movements or revolutions really of the 20th century gave rise to interrelated artistic movements like the Black Arts Movement, the Guerrilla Girls, and international artistic currents such as the Artists for Democracy movement, all of which combined art forms with their revolutionary politics as a means to disrupt government corruption, racism, sexism, like oppression, just in the broadest sense. And doing so, they helped galvanize strong support in their communities and around the world. And I think artists today, like Hank Willis Thomas, who Raven mentioned earlier, and Titus Kaphar, Carrie Mae Weems, Carol Walker, all of them are advancing this artist activist model today. And I think what makes the creative arts and graphic design specifically a site for revolutionary politics is not only the messages that it helps communicate, but the spaces that it occupies. And so exhibits like this one at TheatreSquared is rooted in this tradition of like public and participatory art, which allows communities to have a stake in both the aesthetic and political decisions of their built environment.
Awesome, thank you. I loved hearing kind of the theme of accessibility throughout each of you all's answers. Like, graphic design is a public way to communicate activism or talk about policy or whatever it might be. So I'm actually interested in thinking about the opposite now. So I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think the barriers are for women, non-binary voters, and in the political space as well.
Well, for white middle-class women participating in the political space, it's definitely more accessible than it is for non-white, non-binary, and low-income women, but that exists for women voting today. So the formal barriers being the voter suppression tactics that we see, like strict voter ID laws, closing of polling sites, felony convictions, all of that work to disenfranchise marginalized groups of people, including women. But then the informal barriers I see are, I think, more directly tied to women, non-binary women people who identify as women, which is the lack of confidence and the lack of like political efficacy in voting, and feeling like you're not qualified or not prepared to run for office, or you're unsure about what you're voting for. Basically, the entire electoral process, women are socialized to tame any of their political ambitions from the beginning, basically starting in childhood. There are studies that point to women feeling less qualified to run for office. It takes like many more it takes way longer to convince a woman to run for office than it does to a male counterpart. So I think that's
I think one thing that I sort of would add as well is I think that there are barriers to education. And if we kind of walk all the way back out to, the ability to go to college, the ability to go to a grad program, the ability, if you are kind of operating in that pathway of having, further education, or even just having education that provides like mentorship or guidance into knowing that you have the capacity to move forward in a political space. Or I think, you can see it almost with any kind of discipline, but I think when we think about the education piece and what I've seen, and this is me kind of speaking from as an educator, that I think that there are barriers in school. I think there are barriers to getting to school and barriers to getting out of school in the first place. And so all of those things, whether you can afford to attend, whether you now have student loans when you're out, whether you can afford to do certain job opportunities based on what responsibilities you might already have in terms of your family or what have you. I think that I see a lot of struggle that happens with the education piece, and then having a certain type of credential that allows you to then make it to this other realm. And it's like, it kind of just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And so I think that, for me, I wish that there was just easier access to education, less restrictions in many respects to ways that people can move through and, go to college. And, I think about, for myself, as someone who is, there's student loans that I have to pay back, and there's a sort of cost to that on the other end. And I think that, when you're thinking about the sort of political space, and a lot of individuals who are trying to sort of move forward, once they get out of school or can't get out of school, I guess, I think that that's a barrier that has not really been solved, especially for a lot of folks of color and low-income individuals who are just trying to, figure out a way. And so I think that's one thing that I see very specifically from where I sit.
Thank you. Okay, so I just have actually one more question before we move into our Q&A portion. So if anybody has any questions, please throw them in the chat. I'm happy to read them out loud. If you don't feel comfortable typing, if you wouldn't mind using the hand raising emoji, and I'm happy to allow you to take the mic and speak as well. Just that's the only way I'll know to look for you, is if you put up your emoji. So chat or emoji, either way is fine with me. So last question for you all. This is just on a more positive note. What words of encouragement or wisdom or motivation do you have for new and young voters? I think I stumped them.
Sorry. I was going to say, it's a mode of empowerment, submitting your ballot. I didn't mention that I also designed a poster for this show, and something that I kept thinking about was that we all come from different backgrounds. The struggle for equality continues in multiple ways, but the moment that we are equal is the moment we vote. You know, the moment we put that ballot in the box, our votes are evened. And I just see that as such an empowering moment. So I think that's where I would leave it.
I would echo that. That was beautifully said. I would echo that, and as a historian, I think a lot about those who have come before us, right? Like I think a lot about John Lewis and so many others, and getting into good trouble, right? Like the actual fight that they had to go through. And when I get to vote, when I do vote, my parents make it a priority that we all dress up and we look nice, and we're going in there like looking good, because that's something that my grandmother would encourage all of us to do, as she didn't always have the right to vote. So I feel a ancestral responsibility to always exercise my right. And I know in contemporary times, this is kind of like debated amongst African American people. Like some people are like, no, that shouldn't be a reason. But the struggle of our ancestors is still very present. Like we're talking like 55 years, right? Like that's not a long time. So I feel as though I feel a real responsibility to the foundation, right, that I stand on, to keep building, right, to lift as we climb, as Kelly mentioned earlier, to keep doing that work. So yeah, I'd say it's just an urgency that I encourage, people from, especially from my community, saying like, if you don't use this tool, you could lose it, and we need you to keep using, keep working at it, and pay homage to those that have been.
I think I would also say that, do some research. I think that like we're taught some things in school, and some of it's fragmented, some of it's not right, or some of it's incorrect at times in terms of the historical component. And I think that for me, I would encourage new and young voters to look back at like what has happened, have an understanding of what the history has been, and so that there's a little bit more of like kind of the larger legacy that you're a part of. And I think there's things that I'm still learning every day, and I realize that I have to continue to learn and continue to educate myself on my own history, and how my family history connects to the larger fabric of this country, or even around the world. And so I think that there's like just continuing to do deeper research and be reflective of how that connects to you and your story, so that it can feel like you're more informed when you're going to vote.
I think this new generation of voters has really resisted the political assumptions that determine where our efforts should be targeted. Like they've given us a permission structure to believe in radical imaginations for all of our futures, especially on issues like climate, racial justice, healthcare, etc. So I would only like to remind any group of people who have been systemically disenfranchised that the efforts that some people are making to undermine your right to vote is evidence of the fact that your vote is powerful, and that it does have the ability to change things in a really big fundamental way. So if you can vote, vote. and vote for the person next to you who is actively being suppressed or has lost their right to vote because of bad public policy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up for Q&A, but first I'm going to do my little emoji applause since I can't actually clap for you in person. Thank you so much for participating in that. Those answers were beautiful and wildly beyond what I could have expected for this panel. So again, thank you so much. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat just yet, so I'm going to give folks a little bit of time to think of some things and write some questions down. In the meantime, I'm going to go and review all of the links that Marty has been posting so graciously. Thank you very much. So that way you can kind of look at some of these things that we've been talking about throughout our chat today. So first thing is first, the link to download the posters. Marty posted that. So you can find all of them there, find your favorite, go download it, put it up somewhere. Kelly's poster is also there. And then the two books that Raven mentioned early on in our conversation, Where I Enter and Vanguard, are both listed. And then also the timeline that Kelly mentioned earlier for the exhibition is also listed. So I can give it another little bit for questions. In the meantime, I have a question for you. So Raven, when you introduced yourself, you mentioned that you were doing some work with the League of Women Voters. Could you tell us a little bit about that organization and maybe like what you're doing with them?
Yeah, so I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and the work that we do really centers around ensuring political accessibility, but also making sure people are educated about what's going on in our state. We're a nonpartisan group. We don't take positions on candidates or anything. We just want people to be informed about what's going on in their state. We really have been working to deal with gerrymandering in Arkansas, and that's what our president, President Bonnie Miller, has been working on. So really just trying to register voters has been one of my big things this year, working with them, just making sure people are registered to vote, and also just making sure people are conscious of what's on the ballot, doing different events to give people an opportunity to know who candidates are, what's going on. That's been really important as well. How to get absentee ballots, all of that information. The League of Women Voters has really, really, really worked hard. The members of the organization have worked really hard to get out this year. So yeah, I encourage all of you, if you have a chapter or if you're local, to join the Washington County League of Women Voters. Or if you're in an area where there's a chapter, please get engaged. It's been around. We celebrated our 100th year earlier this year. So it's been around just as long as this work that women, the 19th Amendment has been. I spoke at an event in March before COVID really made all of us the Brady Bunch, right? And yeah, so it's great work, it's important work, and I just love the team that's been working so hard for years to really make sure that people are connected. I'm humbled to work with a lot of those women in the work they do. Their legacies, a lot of them are legacies. Their mothers were in it, their grandmothers were in it. So it's humbling, and I'm grateful. So yeah.
Cool. I still don't see a lot of questions, so I'm just going to I wrote down a bunch, so I'm just going to keep asking them unless somebody else wants to throw it in the chat. I know we only have a little bit of time, so I'll keep it quick. But Kelly, as curator, oh wait, I'll wait to ask mine then. Looks like Becca has a question, so if you want to ask.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but beyond sharing the posters that you all shared, how can we as individuals get other women, especially within our networks, to get out and vote?
difficult question. I think everybody got stumped there, but I think that, I guess what I can say is, as we approach, what is this, 3 weeks out? Are we 3 weeks out? I would just be like telling everybody and anybody that you need to get to voting. And if you are registered already, you know, go early. And if you have been, you had mail-in ballots, to like mail them in, like do whatever it is regarding your particular state or sort of local sort of policies to kind of get the vote in. And I think the one thing that I could also say is just, it's urgent. It's really important in this election. It feels urgent more than I've ever felt before. And so I think if you are able to impress upon the urgency of what it means and how others will be impacted by that vote and how it can support others, I think those are the things that to me are really important in this moment, is just understanding the urgency and thinking about the fact that, you know, oh, it's just, you know, if you have kind of that flip attitude, like, oh, I don't really matter, it doesn't really matter. I think it's sort of pushing against that kind of attitude and, you know, showing the dire nature of where we are, because that's how I feel like it is at this moment. So that's what I would say.
I agree, Kelly Walters. As a fellow educator, when we started this semester at MSU, I teach 2 studio classes to my graphic design students. And the first thing I talked about was, okay, how many people have registered to vote? And this is the deadline to register to vote. And, you know, I've talked to them about this project. And I know that's just a small sample, that's just 40 students, but boy, I think we each need to do whatever we can to get people out there. I've already dropped off my ballot in the Dropbox. Michigan is being really proactive about mail-in voting and absentee voting. But I still don't feel comfortable putting it in the mail. So I drove to the Dropbox, put it in there. It was the day after I got it, you know, that was a couple weeks ago. And if I could get an email saying we received your ballot, that would be a real stress reliever to me, because I just kind of, I'm hoping everything works.
Oh, sorry, Raven, did you want to say something really quick?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm always curious as to, I try to lean in and inquire why you don't want to vote. And I tell them like not partisan, like let's just talk and just try to understand what some of their hesitations are, and then remind them, as we've all mentioned today, that their voice is so important, and really just try to really emphasize the importance of their voice, and echoing both the Kellys. Yeah, just really trying to ensure that they understand the urgency, understanding and being empathetic to their concerns, but then turning around and saying, we need you, like this world needs you, and this is your opportunity to be there.
I have one last question for Raven, and then I've got a couple of announcements I want to make and try to save everyone's time. So Raven, we have a question for you, and they said, yes, how has voter enthusiasm and engagement been?
You know, most people, you know, a lot of people are really concerned about the way the world is right now. Let me just say that. We're not always able to like hear a ton of different positions and things like that, or give our opinions, but people are concerned about the way the world is, about healthcare, about all these different things that affect them directly. And yeah, people have really taken to the streets. It's been beautiful to see people say, I'm registered. Where do I, let me just show me where I'm, like, you know, on our Arkansas state page, you can show where, if you're registered, and make sure you're registered. So we had people doing that, just double checking. It was really beautiful to see that. And doing it on game days where, you know, you're cheering for the Hogs, you got a ton of other people there. It's just really important, and it's always really special when people say like, yes, I'm going, I'm registered, we're here. Like it's been really great. It's been a great year.
Awesome, good to hear. Great, well, that's all the time that we have. Again, thank you so much to all 4 of our lovely panelists for being involved, and thank you to everybody who has had a hand in making this happen, along with the exhibition, which you can see at TheatreSquared from the outside. And I think if you contact Marty Maxwell Lane, you can also see the rest of the posters inside. You can also get a catalog at the box office. A couple of things I wanted to mention. Please don't forget to check out the rest of the gallery online. The link is in the chat. It's also on nwa.aiga.org. You can download them there. Local voting starts Monday in Fayetteville, so and it's open until November 2nd, and then of course November 3rd is election day. That is the absolute last day that you can vote, so please get out there and do it. Marty's posted a couple of resources to find your sample ballots, polling places, etc. So check that link out in the chat as well. And then upcoming events for AIGA, you can check out again on nwa.aiga.org. So they are currently recruiting new folks to apply for the board. I currently serve as an advisor, but was on the board since the beginning of the chapter, and it has been the best time of my life. Met some of my best friends there. So I highly encourage you to apply if you're looking to get some local experience in the design community. Start there. Bloom is an organization, or sorry, an event that they've been putting on at local small businesses in order to get them some traction through COVID. As we know, things are a little bit hectic right now. So if you go and patron a local small business, they will give you a free headshot with a beautiful floral backdrop. And this one is October 24th in downtown Rogers, next to Dandy Roll. I forget the name. If somebody could put the name in the chat of the actual place it'll be. I don't remember, but I know it's next to Dandy Roll in downtown Bentonville. The town Halloween, which I think is a really cute name, is on October 29th. You can also find that on their website, and you can register for the Zoom meeting there. And then the last thing, if you're a student or if you're a local professional designer who wants to contribute to the portfolio review, that will be on November 12th through the 14th. It's called Under Review. Also a really great event. Students, highly encourage you to sign up. I've, again, either gotten my portfolio review since I was a student or been a reviewer since I've been out of school, and it's always A1, no matter which side of the table you're on. So highly encourage. That's it. That was a lot of announcements, but thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and I hope you have a lovely Friday and end of the week. Bye.